Good afternoon, everyone. Good morning, good evening from anywhere you are in the world. I'm Olaniwaju Popola. I'm a member of the FIP ECPG Publications Committee. I'm currently in the UK. I'm a master's student. I'm a pharmacist by training. And it's really lovely to be interviewing the iconic, the legendary Dr. Catherine Duggan. It's nice to have you here with us.
It's an absolute delight, Laura. Thank you so much. And thank you as well for those kind words. I will say that is no pressure. To be called an icon on a Friday afternoon is no pressure at all. So I'll see what we can do.
So just a brief background, right? So currently, Dr. Catherine serves as the Chief Executive Officer of the International Pharmaceutical Federation, where she provides visionary leadership, support professional development, and advocacy across 144 member organizations and over 4 million members that the FIP represents. Previously, she has served as the Director of Professional Development and Support at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society in the United Kingdom, where she was responsible for the delivery of professional advice and support to members across all sectors. She has been awarded the Honorary Fellowship of the Royal Pharmaceutical Society. She is an honorary professor at the School of Pharmacy, University of Nottingham. She's a proud alumni of the School of Pharmacy, University of London, where she obtained a bachelor's in pharmacy and a doctorate in pharmacy and health services. So we are very glad to have you here, and we look forward to a wonderful time doing this interview. So this interview is in light of the commemoration of the International Women's Day, which is a day that's set apart to celebrate the acts, courage, and contribution and successes of women like Dr. Catherine to the world. It's also a time to reflect on emerging threats to gender equality and women empowerment, and also devise actions, policies, and strategies to promote women's engagement in decision making. So for the first question, can you kindly just give a brief of your career journey so far? Just give us some information about the highs, the lows, the inspirations. What has kept you going?
That is a lovely question. So as I look back on my career to date and where I've ended up, I think it's always helpful to talk about, as you say, the things that worked out very, very well, and the things that you took a chance on, and the things that made you change direction a little bit. So I graduated from the School of Pharmacy, University of London, with a pharmacy degree in the early 90s. And then I did my pre-registration training in a hospital in North London. That year, Lonray, the regulator had deemed it very useful for those colleagues having a pre-reg in hospital to spend a couple of weeks in community, and those doing a pre-reg in community to spend a couple of weeks in hospital. And I went to a community pharmacy in North London, and the community pharmacist there was one of those people who completely changed my life. It was a great 2 weeks. It was amazing. I also got very inspired at that point because I could see a lot of patients coming out from the hospital, patients who I could have been seeing as a pre-reg in the hospital, but no information was going to their pharmacy. The pharmacist was almost managing the medicines blindly. So this got me thinking about a PhD, which I started in the early 90s, a year later. But there was no grants for a PhD at that time, so I had to work at the same time. So the colleague who I had been inspired by, he was leaving that pharmacy. So I worked 1 week in that community pharmacy and 1 week on my PhD, which was a great time, It got me, the PhD was all about how to improve medication safety, reduce discrepancies and changes in medicines, reduce patient harm by providing community pharmacists with information as the patients left the hospital. And being in the community at that time, whilst doing my research at the Royal London Hospital, gave me a great insight into some of the characteristics of those patients. He moved on. I had to leave the pharmacy at that point because I couldn't work full time. And I then undertook several several other jobs at the same time. So I worked in community 1 day a week. I worked in policy making another day a week. I worked in the university, and I did my PhD. And finally, I completed my PhD in 1998, at which time I was also working in the Royal Free Hospital in the Department of Population and Population Sciences. And there they were looking at big data and looking at the impact that pharmacists could make on various elements of patient care and cost and pharmacoeconomics, for example. So that got me thinking about other forms of data. Then I took up a joint appointment following my PhD with the School of Pharmacy and the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel, where I'd done my data collection. And I got inspired by students. I got inspired by many of the young pharmacists who were working their way through either their degree or their early careers. So we set up the Academic Department of Pharmacy at the Royal London Hospital, which was a collaboration between the hospital and the university. And we had students undertaking research with the patients. We had pre-regs, we had early career pharmacists like yourselves involved in various different postgraduate qualifications, masters and PhDs. So I developed a really big feeling for supporting practitioners to do research and evaluation, light touch or fully into PhDs. And as I moved on in there, I got very interested in this clinical pharmacy story. I became the head of research and development at UKCPA, which is a United Kingdom Clinical Pharmacy Association. I'd been a member of that since I was a very young pharmacist. And from that, I became the chair of UKCPA. And that was around 2008, so about 10 years after my PhD. I'd been supervising PhD students as well. So I was getting a very good understanding of practice, research into practice, practice into research, professional development, basically equipping ourselves with the ability to undertake evaluations to make us as knowledgeable and respected around pharmacy practice, and always working with evidence of impact. And I'll come back to that in 2 seconds, Lonray. So then in our profession in the UK at that time, there was a great big change afoot for pharmacy. Previously, there'd been a very dangerous doctor called Dr. Harold Shipman, and he had murdered many of his patients. And when they were investigating this, they were looking at, he was a very well-regarded doctor. He was very high in his Royal College. He had never done anything wrong as far as the register. They were looking at how medicine might be able to spot bad eggs, so to speak. And of course, because he had to get his medicines from a pharmacy, they were also looking at pharmacy. So the proposal was at that time that pharmacy, the professional body at that time, RPSGB, which was also the regulator, had to split into two. That was about 2008. A paper called Trust, Assurance and Safety came out. So I got very passionate about this because at that point, pharmacy was then going to have a Royal College. So I stood for council. I stood for election on the RPSGB council. And then at the end of 2009, the position of Director of Professional Development and Support came up. I joined them in 2010. And it was amazing because I was also in charge of the research group, and the research group were also involved in giving grants to early career pharmacists. I'd had exactly that grant in the early 90s. So, you know, nearly 30 years earlier, 20 years earlier, I'd had a grant from the same organization that I was then in charge of. I worked at the Royal Pharmaceutical Society until 2018. And actually this week on Tuesday was the 6th anniversary of the announcement of my appointment as CEO of FIP, commonly known as the best job in the world. And the issue there was I'd always been at FIP. I'd gone to my first FIP in 1992, the first Congress. I'd made friends along the way. I loved the people I was meeting, and Lonray, you'll have that with your ECPG colleagues. You just love each other, working with each other. You'll make friends for life in this opportunity. And then the role came up, and I thought, I'm happy where I am. Why do I need to move on? I thought, well, you know, you've always loved the FIP. You'd always loved the global elements, learning from others, learning about research, learning about practice. Why not think about going for it? And I did. And Lonray, I'm the first female CEO. And I think when we go through the rest of the questions today, we can pull out top tips about not being afraid to be the first. Someone has to be the first, so why not you? And that doesn't mean that I wouldn't want the best man for the job to get the job, but it was just very gratifying to be considered the eligible person for the CEO and to be the first woman. And I think that gives me that feeling that I need to be a really good role model to my team. I try to be. That doesn't always work. You try to be authentic as well, but also not to leave men behind in my discussions, or the men in my team or in the profession itself. So not to be exclusive, but to be equitable. And that's something I wanted to mention in this introductory remark. And of course, my career journey, 6 years in the post, I will be on the 1st of June this year. And I hope that I continue many more years in this position as CEO of FIP.
Okay, thank you so much. What an amazing career journey. Starting all the way from your bachelor's, getting into research, the flip between the community and the hospital pharmacy, it's really amazing. In my experience, I've also worked in both the hospital and community pharmacy, and back home where I used to work, there's quite some discrepancies. So I really understand what you mean by from practice to research and from research back to practice. And I think that's something that we really need to imbibe in several pharmaceutical organizations. And you being the first female CEO is actually quite inspiring, because now a lot of female pharmacists out there have someone, a role model they can always point out to that has done it. So they always make reference to you. Even back home, I see so many young pharmacists inspired by your story, inspired by your appointment, and really moving on to do greater things in the pharmacy profession. So that's really amazing. The second question, can you just share with us how you've achieved some amazing feats as the CEO of the FIP, right? Some of your strengths and competencies that helped you achieve so much, and maybe a few of the weaknesses you had to overcome along the way.
I think this is a great question. I think, Lanra, when I walk you through my years in the profession, it looks like there's been a very neat story. It looks like it all made sense along the way. And then I did this, and then I did this. But one thing I would give a piece of advice on, a lot of things that you end up doing are not necessarily the things you thought you would be doing. It's always good to take a chance and take an opportunity, and to feel very flexible with that. The degree we have gives us opportunities to even go back to what we did before. So some of the feats that I've achieved as CEO are mainly about the people that are around me. So along the way in my career, if I could look back and tell younger Catherine some of the things not to worry so much about, not to worry about being 100% right about everything before you try it, not to worry about being so worried about what people think of you all the time. That's a really interesting trait, and that's something some of us need to work on through our career. But also to understand that when you move into leadership positions, Lonred, you will shine if you allow other people to shine. So in FIP, I was very lucky to be appointed by a bureau who took a chance, the first woman CEO. There's not everybody will think that this is a good thing, that because it's the first one, there might be risks with it. How is this woman going to work in the organization? One of the big things was the fact that the first female president of FIP was part of that bureau. And I owe a lot to Carmen Pena. And she is a woman who has shown similar leadership. She has been, she's got a doctorate, she's led national organizations, she's led national companies, her own companies. She's an amazing mother. And then she was the first female president. So I was able to kind of learn from her. She was president for my first 3 months. And then, of course, Dominique Jourdain, who we sadly lost last year to lung cancer, he was my president from September 2018. And he's a very strong character. So he enabled me to almost grow into my role in the first 6 to 12 months without exposing too many vulnerabilities. That's another thing to notice. The first 6 to 12 months in a new position, you will feel quite shaky sometimes. And then we just developed this very good collegiate approach that he knew that I had his back. I knew he had my back. But if I worked with him very closely, we would both succeed. So we set some really big agenda items. And then, of course, COVID hit. And COVID hit the organization in February, March of 2020. And we were set to have a global congress in Spain that year and 2 regional conferences and a big group meeting of all of our officers in The Hague that March. And of course, all of that had to stop. In 2019, we'd done about 15 webinars. We suddenly had to go digital. We had to learn how to do that. We were losing all our revenue from congresses. And of course, many membership organizations were also in a similar position. So they were not always able to pay their fees. So we had to think about how to flip the business model and basically try everything that was new at that time. And what has it done for us? Well, it's enabled us to do meetings like this. Of course, we need the Global Congress. Of course, we need face-to-face meetings. But Lonra, opening up our offering online, free at the point of access to our profession, has enabled all the low-income countries to access everything that we have. And then obviously we tempt them into membership. And I think I would say to you that our membership now has grown to 156 organizations, and the 4 million footprint is growing and growing as well. And then as we came out of the pandemic, we were thinking, how are we going to work? How are we going to manage? Well, we have a program team that has doubled in size. The entire team of FIP is tripled in size. We have sponsorship revenue. We have to work very carefully with our sponsors to maintain our WHO relationship, but it's enabled us to provide support, enable, and advance pharmacy worldwide. And the third piece was, when the entire world went dark, pharmacy remained open. So FIP remained open. And our relationships with WHO, we signed a memorandum of understanding on top of our triennial agreement with them, which has been in place since they were set up in 1948. We signed one in May 2019. And if you go to my Twitter page or X page, you'll see the tagged photo is me pinning an FIP badge onto Dr. Tedros's lapel, and he still wears it when I'm in town. I think he's frightened of what I'll say. But we were able to showcase and share how we were, as a profession, globally contributing to universal health coverage through that pandemic, from the identification of the medicines, the manufacturing of the medicines, the invention of the vaccines, the supply of the vaccines, then the vaccination programs itself, alongside all of the other healthcare needs. And the final piece then, I would say, is the partnership I have through the World Health Professions Alliance, where we work shoulder to shoulder with doctors, nurses, dentists, and physiotherapists as the 5 healthcare professions of the world, representing 41 million healthcare professionals. And that relationship has grown stronger and stronger during, and maybe because of, the pandemic. And I'm now the chair of the CEOs group for 2024. So we have a lot to promote on behalf of those 41 million, but also on behalf of our 4 million. So I think that's just a little spotlight of, you'll achieve so much more if you work in a team. You need to make alliances. You need to forge friendships and collaborations so that, again, you can really strengthen your work. And of course, you have to do some really big things on your own as a CEO. But it's so much better to do the things with teams. And I would say one of my biggest prides is the ECPG, the evolution of your group through all of the leadership that you all demonstrate to us. It's really fundamental. You are the future of pharmacy. So I'm super proud of you, and I'm super proud of all of the work you're leading and the development you're all going through.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. It's such a privilege to, volunteer with the FIP ECPG. And it's quite amazing that in the so-called pitfall of the COVID-19, the pharmacy profession really emerged as a giant in the health sector. And I think that period really made a global statement of the role that pharmacists had to play in public health, increasing the membership organizations of the FIP to 156, tripling the workforce of the FIP. So many really amazing things coming from the COVID-19. Well, indeed, I guess there is some form of light in every darkness. Now, a couple of the questions will be tailored towards the development goals. Okay, so in alignment with the FIP Development Goals 5, which is competency and development, and the Development Goal 6, which is leadership development, we would like your take, your perspective, your opinions on how young pharmacists, especially female pharmacists, could develop some competencies, especially for leadership.
So I think there's formal programs you can go through, and I'll come on to those in a minute. And then there's just this understanding that all the way through your career, you're learning how to develop yourself, how to build on your strengths, but also how to hone your weaknesses. It's not enough to just look in the mirror and think, what am I good at? Let's improve that. To be a holistic, you need to focus on some of the weaknesses and make those into strengths. I think this is really important, Lana, because that makes the development that you will undertake meaningful to you and your situation, where a course provides you with maybe more formalized, recognized knowledge and skills. Then you can learn and adapt those as you go. One of the things that Dominique was very impressed by, and Paul Sinclair, our new president, who is also a real force for good, absolutely supportive of pharmacy. He actually is a pharmacist himself, obviously, but so is his daughter, and he comes from a family of pharmacists. So he really is in the pharmacy family fully. He totally believes and supports the notion of developing leadership in young pharmacists so that you learn your little L's to make a big capital L by the time you are a completely grown-up expert. Another point I want to make is that you don't need to wait for a leadership position to develop leadership skills. Indeed, if you do that, you'll have the fear. You need to be developing little bits of leadership. And Noor from my team, who also joins us on this interview today, she will tell you that I'm quite keen on pushing people out of their comfort zones and without leaving them exposed or frail, just offering people opportunities so they can think, goodness me, I didn't think I'd be able to do that, and then to be ready to do it again. But one of the things that Dominique mentioned when we were signing up to the Astana Declaration in 2018 was that we would advance the entire profession and we would make sure to leave nobody behind. And Paul completely attests to this. And that means that there are some people in the profession who have lots of knowledge and skills. There are some organizations that have lots of services, products, deliverables, and others that have less. So what we want to do is we want to match them together. So where we have organizations that provide great content, we'd like to match them both to our individual members and to the member organizations. And one of those is Curricular Solutions. They developed a pharmacist leadership program, which could be useful for young pharmacists. And even as you grow through your career, go back and do it again and keep on developing yourself. And that's a nice top tip. It's designed to give pharmacists and our pharmaceutical scientists the knowledge and skills required to drive the pharmacist as leader agenda. And we all need pharmacy to step up and step into the leadership positions. And it's been awarded the FIP seal, which basically guarantees you that it's of quality, that the content is suitable for your portfolio, and that you can learn from it and add it to your portfolios of learning. And nicely, you also get a certification at the end, and it's in line with the goal number 6, so leadership development, but also with the other goals, really around, competency development. Leadership shouldn't just be regarded as a soft skill. It can be really, really difficult. I think it's really important that young pharmaceutical scientists, young pharmacists, early career, or when you move career, you move sector, let's say, and you start a new job in a new area, that you can go back and learn from these again and again. So there's that. And then mentorship schemes, which you have initiated and that we're looking at for FIP-wise, which is our FIP Women in Science and Education, is a really excellent opportunity for people to feel supported, develop a relationship with another person who can give them feedback, and really to learn on the job. And I think leadership, coaching, mentorship really pushes us to develop the skills, and then with opportunities at work, maybe going into something that you're less comfortable with, that you learn from, and constantly think about the weaker sides of your portfolio rather than only focusing on the strong. You'll emerge as this really rounded leader later on. And we've seen such great leadership, both across the inception of YPG, now ECPG, but during the pandemic, honestly, every single one of us had to demonstrate leadership, and we did, and it's great.
Okay, thank you so much for that. It's quite important that to be well-rounded, we have to take note of not just our strengths, but also develop and build on our weaknesses. Okay, I think you've kind of answered a bit of this question, but I would still ask again. So some challenges and limitations you had in your career journey, and very importantly, how did you overcome
So, Lamra, I think there's two ways of thinking about this. There's the things that may be an opportunity but look challenging right at the very beginning. And because I tended to do things first in my career, so I was one of the first people to do a pharmacy practice PhD in the early 90s, but there wasn't a grant or there wasn't a process of funding. So I kind of worked part-time and self-funded and then got a grant along the way. So that was a first. That was really difficult. But because I didn't know any different, it was also a really big opportunity. And then at the end of it, don't feel sorry for yourself. You kind of go, do you know, I've learned how to multitask. I'm able to manage my time really well because I've had to work on 5 jobs. You know, you can manage the research at the same time. So when you're faced with these things that may look like a challenge right at the very beginning, think to yourself, this might be hard, but what am I learning? Then the next piece, I think, is the pandemic. We have to look at that and say that was really challenging, very scary at times. But I mentioned in my answer previously, having a bureau and having a president and having a team that fully support you mean that if it doesn't work, don't do it again. So if you try something out and it doesn't work, just take that risk in the very beginning, cost the risk in, make sure it's not going to cause a disaster if it doesn't work. But if it doesn't work, just don't do it again. It's a very, very good top tip. And I think probably one of the things would be over explaining yourself or over justifying yourself to colleagues who may not understand you. I spent a lot of time in a previous role doing that, particularly to the finance director, when really I could have just maybe saved myself the effort and got other people to advocate for me, or even ask them to read my papers, for example. To really think about what people are asking you in that moment rather than feeling threatened by it is a top tip I would give to my younger self. And that's really, really important. I would say there were challenges at every step in my career because lots of people hadn't done what I was doing, but they weren't limitations, they were opportunities. And I think if you look at the health needs in our countries and globally right now, pharmacists are ideally placed to take all of the opportunities that might be challenging and make them into absolutely win-win-win and golden deliveries for patients and the public and for ourselves, because that really inspires you. And then you think, goodness me, I love the people I'm working with, I'm making a difference, I'm having an impact. That's the really important thing, Monra. And having an impact might be the big evidence pieces that I was talking about before, the published papers, but it can also be how you make other people feel when you work with them, which I think you can see at ECPG. You're all very keen to make each other feel great and be great.
I truly agree with you that there are lots of opportunities out there that are disguised as challenges, and it's important that we make win-win-win situations from all of them. Okay, so on to our next question. Our next question is in alignment with the development goal 10, which is gender equity and equality. And it's just, what do you perceive is the current threat to women empowerment and gender equity and equality, especially in education globally? And how can young pharmacists, especially females, contribute to mitigating that?
This is a great question. I feel like equity and equality is a constantly moving feast. And when you feel like you're making huge steps towards it, so we don't have to worry about it anymore, we can see things flowing back. And I mean that not just in gender and workforce, but I mean that in all types of minority groupings or equity and equality around access to healthcare, as well as education. And I would say that it's everyone's job to think about equity and equality of opportunity. It's not down to women to just solve this. And we see some of the best supporters being men in the profession. So it's really about understanding how we can work together to achieve that. it's worth noting that women make up the majority of all health professions, all health workers, all health workforces, as well as make the majority of pharmaceutical workforce. We predict that by 2030, more than 70% of our workforce will be women. Although men are outnumbered in the global pharmacy workforce, women are still underrepresented in leadership roles. It's why I make a big deal about me being CEO and being a woman, because for me, it's been a natural progression, but it's not for very, very many people. You look at the leadership in pharmaceutical industries, in academia, you look at leadership in senior hospital positions, and many community or policy or government roles, they do tend to be men. So we think this is a bit of a step backwards from equal working. And also, we've also looked particularly at women in science and education, because that's really where we start. So if people can see, if you can see it, you can be it. And I think with all sorts of minorities in our world, having women being seen as equal is a good role model for other minorities, because after all, the 51% of the population is female. We've got a positive practice environment toolkit we did in alliance with the WHPA. We adapted that for women in science and education and identified 5 key factors to enable positive practice, which includes equal incentives for equal work, work-life balance, creating supportive and safe working environments, recognition, empowerment, women in leadership. Because when any of those are missing, then we just see inequity and inequality bubbling up, so to speak. A little bit of a hole means the rest of the pieces are fragile. And also it can lead to unsatisfied or dissatisfied working, and it can lead to lack of job satisfaction, lack of career progression. So it becomes a very vicious circle. We also know from our colleagues in the Women in Global Health that the pandemic really intensified gender disparities, gender inequities. Very often women were working at home, but also doing the majority of the care and the house maintenance jobs. And it's led to this concept called the Great Resignation, particularly in high-income countries, which demands urgent action. Our DG number 10, which is the global implementation of equity and equality, is really, really important. And we'd love ECPG to champion this. Everybody should be focused on equity, equality. Obviously, this is all about International Women's Day, so let's have a focus on women. But it's not just about women, it's about being equal and equitable to all. And we really want to support the initiative on the 11th of February, the UN International Day of Women and Girls in Science. Let's start young. Let's think about equity and equality from a very young age, and then it becomes normal and natural. And we really want to attract men and women into all the fields in our great profession, from pharmaceutical science through to education, through to practice, and everything in between. Our public and our populations need more pharmacists, and more pharmacists need more equity. So there you go, Banra.
Thank you so much for your response. And I think it's really important that you mentioned something about seeing it and being it. I think a lot of inspiration is really needed. And I totally agree that both men and women have to work together to eliminate all forms of discriminations, gender discriminations and inequalities. It's important, and I'm glad that the FIP will be collaborating with the United Nations in their efforts to continue to promote equity. Really amazing. So this question is more about opportunities within the FIP for continuous professional development, right? That perhaps young female pharmacists could participate in.
You have a very, very good track record in ECPG of supporting your women leaders, supporting each other, but also men supporting women and women supporting men. It's a very supportive environment, and I really commend you for that, because actually that's where leadership starts. And then continually professionally developing that, as I mentioned, keeping an eye on your own leadership development, but also accessing courses. Coming to the Congress is a very good opportunity to see lots of popular topics and improve knowledge. And then when you see it again, you can be it, you could speak, and that develops leadership skills and attributes as well. We've got a lot of CPD bites, which are like mini bite-sized pieces of CPD that we can use. And it would be great if we could co-create some on leadership if that was needed. And that would be a really nice way of us supporting ECPG to develop leadership opportunities through that medium. They're really bite-sized, easy access, and again, build up your leadership portfolio. We've got lots of digital events that include lots of topics in pharmacy and pharmaceutical sciences. So alongside the leadership development skills that you have, developing your leadership in a particular area is another way that you can continually develop. There's a lot of special interest groups, advisory groups, the hub. We've got the commissions. We've got various ways in which you can engage with FIP above and beyond being involved in the boards, which is a great place for you to develop leadership. And you are the future leaders of these groups, so we'd really encourage you. And I'd really like all young professionals out there to become a member of sorts, a member of the FIP ECPG, because it supports all of you connecting with early career pharmacists. As I mentioned to you, it makes me feel very old, but my first Congress in 1992, I met some people there that I am still really close friends with. It's not just about leadership, Lonra, it's about personal development, personal relationships, and really making this global network of friends and support, which will see you through many tough times and the good times too.
Wonderful. And I think in a couple of our discussion, a couple of the questions, the FIP Congress kind of keeps coming up, and I guess it's such a great opportunity for personal, professional development, and even networking. That, just as you said, could create platforms for long life friendships, collaborations, and partnership. Really amazing, really amazing. Okay, and this is our last question for today. It's what personal advice would you give to young female pharmacists out there who want to make an impact in pharmacy, who want to improve global health outcomes, and who want to change the world?
Well, I would say that my personal advice is not just for young female pharmacists, and I'm being equitable here. I'm going to say it's for young male pharmacists too. I would say the advice personally would be, don't worry too much about making the right or perfect decision about your job. Take opportunities, find new experiences, and you've got such a breadth of applications across your pharmacy degrees that you will be able to move between sectors and jobs as you go. So take opportunities, number one. Develop your own brand and stick to it. Don't take yourself too seriously. Have a good sense of humor. This works particularly well if you are working with people from other countries and other cultures. So have that, lightness of spirit about things. View challenges as opportunities, or try and find a pathway to making the challenge into an opportunity. And that's a great personal development skill, which is also good for family life as well. And my final piece would be continue to learn as you go. It's really, really interesting how many times you come across similar situations in life. They might be more complex, they might be slightly different in culture or tone, but if you've learned from the previous time, you'll find it easier to manage the new problem as it pops up. And just something I think that the group does really, really well, ECPG, you've got a network of peers who are around your same age or thereabouts. These will be your friends forever. You can see them at Congress. There are groupings of people who've known each other for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years and longer. And use those friendships and allyships to support each other in terms of equity, in terms of equality, and in terms of leadership development. I'm so delighted that you have interviewed me today, Lonra. It was really, really lovely having a chat with you. And I think you're a real testament to equity in the way that you've asked the questions, and a celebrator of female leadership as well in the way you've celebrated me and my achievements. And I thank you ever so much.
You're welcome. The honor is mine. So thank you so much for your time, for making our time for us. The FIP CPG is very grateful. And to young pharmacists out there, you can all see the different opportunities within the FIP and the FIP ECPG, opportunities for networking, professional development, opportunities to learn new skills, to participate, to let your voices get heard. And just as Dr. Kitchen has said, you don't have to have it all figured out. Take opportunities as they come, learn as you go, be a lifelong learner. And hopefully one day you'll be the FIP CEO too, right?
Very good.
Yes. Yeah.
An
So
absolute
thank
pleasure,
you
Lonra.
very
Thank you
much.
so much. Really, honestly, a pleasure. And you know that I'm here for ECPG at any time. Also, to note, if any ideas come from you, if you need anything from us as a team, just ask. Again, I mentioned we'll try new things. If they work, brilliant. If they don't, nothing lost.